Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is Thursday, December the 23rd, 2021. It is currently 1:53 p.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from the empty sanctuary of Victory Baptist Church, located right here in the middle of nowhere, Texas. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope that you will participate in what we're trying to do. So before I tell you what we're trying to do, now if you listen to the last live broadcast, you already have an idea, but this one's going to be a little bit different in our focus. The last one was focused on one particular platform, one particular site. This is going to be far more expansive, covering a lot of different platforms and a lot of different things. And a lot of different categories. So hopefully you listen carefully. Hopefully you will participate. The key for this to be successful is your participation. You can email me, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. If you're a part of the Discord group, you can obviously offer your thoughts and perspective there as well. But let's get to this. Let's talk about podcast. Let's talk about podcasting. Because podcasts, there are so many available. Obviously, you're listening to one, right? I don't really have to go into what a podcast is because you're listening to the Theology Central podcast. So you're already familiar with what a podcast is. So I don't need to go through all of that, but let's just give you a little bit of statistics, a little bit of information about podcasting in 2021. Are you ready? These are statistics that were generated in April of 2021. So they've got to be relatively accurate, all right? How many podcasts are there? According to the research from this particular site, and this was as of, they updated this. These statistics come from December 2021. So from this month, right now as I'm speaking, there are over 2 million podcasts. All right, over 2 million podcasts are currently available with over 48 million episodes. Over 2 million podcasts are available to you right now, right? On whatever device you're using, whatever podcasting app you use, there are over 2 million podcasts available to you with over 48 million episodes. Now you'd be like, well, that's really cool. But what you probably should be thinking is, well, that's insane. That's overwhelming. And it is overwhelming. And what happens is you have a podcast app. How many of all of that content are you really using that platform, that app to really to the best that you, in other words, are you using that podcasting app to get the most from it? Or are you just looking like there's just too much? Okay, I'm just going to pick that, and maybe you're missing out on some things that could be greatly beneficial to you. Obviously, this is a theology podcast, but what could be beneficial to you spiritually? What could be beneficial to you as far as being informed about what's going on in your world? What could be beneficial and maybe being somewhat entertaining? Right? There's a lot of different ways of looking at it, but that's just so much. And if you are on Netflix, Hulu, any of those, sometimes you'll just realize there's so much content that you're just looking, and you just get frustrated after a while. Like, you know what, whatever. You just either go to something you've already seen, or you just get tired and say, I'm not going to watch anything. Well, going through a podcast app, you can be like, what? Okay, that, I don't know. And you realize you can't listen to everything. So sometimes because you realize you can't listen to everything and you're overwhelmed, you miss out on good content. So over 2 million podcasts, over 48 million episodes available to you. Here's some demographics and some statistics in regards to podcasting. 75% of the United States population is familiar with the term podcasting. Now I have to stop for a second. Who in America isn't familiar with the term podcasting? If you know someone in America who doesn't know the term podcasting, please have them contact me. I mean, I can understand like people in their 80s or 90s. I mean, you know, maybe their 70s, maybe 60s, maybe. Okay, maybe I'll go even in the 60s, but I mean, I just don't know. How in the world can you be alive on this planet and haven't heard the term podcast. I mean, it's talked about everywhere. Subscribe to our podcast, subscribe to our podcast, subscribe to our podcast, subscribe to our podcast. That's crazy that there would be that many people who don't know. 50% of all U.S. homes are podcast fans. 55%, or they have 155 million of the U.S. population has listened to a podcast. So 155 million people have listened to a podcast. 37%, 104 million, listen to a podcast at least every month. All right, so 104 million people listen to a podcast every month. 68 million, 24%, listen to a podcast weekly. 16 million people in the U.S. are avid podcast fans. 51% of podcast listeners are male, 49% female. So according to this, more men listen to podcasts than females. That is not what I have ever seen. I have never seen that. I mean, going back all the way, look, I basically started podcasting in 2001, okay, before I think even podcasting was a term. I don't care which platform I've ever been on. I don't care where we placed our content. It's always been 70, 80% female. I don't know why in the world, but it has always been. So that's crazy that more men supposedly listen to podcasts. You can tell me whether you agree or disagree. The age of listeners, from the age 12 to 34 makes up 48%. So kids starting at the age of 12 to the age of 34, that's 48%. 35 to 54, that age group, so age 12 to 34 makes up 48% of the listeners. 35 to 54 makes up 32%, and 55 plus 20%. That makes the younger more in tune to technology. That makes sense. 63% of podcast listeners are white. So white people tend to listen to podcasting more than other races. I don't know why. That's kind of interesting. 41% of monthly podcast listeners have household incomes of over $75,000, right? Which is versus 29% of the U.S. population. So 41% of monthly podcast listeners have a household income of over $75,000. 25% of U.S. podcast listeners have a 4-year college degree, where only 19% of the population does. So podcast fans tend to have college degrees. 51% are full-time, are employed full-time, versus 44% of the population. So podcast listeners at large tend to be white, making over $75,000 a year, have a 4-year college degree, and tend to be employed full-time. That seems some of the basics there. In Canada, only 63% of the Canadian population is familiar with the term podcasting. What in the world are you doing in Canada? 36% listened to a podcast in the last month. Only 23% listened to podcasts in the last week. You're in Canada. It's cold. What in the world are you doing other than listening to podcasts? Hey, Canada, I mean, come on. Hey, I know we have Canadian listeners. What are you guys doing? You're not listening to podcasts? Come on, get with the program. We need you listening to podcasts, okay? Australia, 87%. Whoa. Man, Australia, that is crazy. 87% of Australian population is familiar with the term podcasting. Man, so Australians know what podcasting is, but here's what's weird. Only 30% of Australian population has listened to a podcast. So 87% are aware of it, but only 30% have listened. 25% listened to at least in the last month. 17% in the last week. Again, Australia, what's going on in Australia that's so like, hey, we all know what podcasting is, but we have all decided in Australia not to listen. Did y'all get together and send out a memo? Hey, okay, guys, there's this new thing called podcasting. Yeah, I'm familiar. All right, here's the stance in Australia. We don't listen. Okay, we just don't. We don't. All right, remove all podcasting apps from your mobile devices. What? Maybe the people who do listen in Australia. Hey, you Canadians and Australians, what in the world is going on? Now in Italy, 26% listened to a podcast in the last month, and that's all they really can tell us about Italy. They don't have a lot of statistics about Italy. Here we go. Here's the listening habits of podcasters. 90% of podcast listening is done at home. What in the world? 90%? I would have absolutely bet $1 million that it was done while you're commuting to work. That is crazy. I really would have thought people listen while they're commuting to work. Was where I figure most of our listening. That's where most of our listeners listen to us. 64% listen while driving. I figured it would be 90% listening while they're driving, 64% listening while they're at home. But that's interesting. Podcast listeners subscribe to an average of 6 shows. Okay, all right. I have to laugh because I subscribe, and I'm not joking. Probably close to 1,000 different podcasts. I subscribe to everything. To me, my favorite thing. I love doing this. Okay, I'm going to do it right now. It's my favorite thing to do. All right, I'm going to the Breaker podcasting app. I have different playlists on Breaker. I'm going to pull down right now. Here we go. It's a little circle thing. And boom, 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 boom. All of these new episodes. Oh, I have a new episode from BBC News Minute. All right, BBC News Minute. Here we go.
Jury in Minnesota is preparing to give its verdict in the trial of former policewoman Kim Potter.
She's accused of fatally shooting a black man during a traffic stop arrest in April. She's denied it.
Sad news. At least 5 people have been killed in Maiduguri in Nigeria after militants fired rockets near the airport.
All right, that's the BBC Minute. Okay, so Will said 90% in car for him. Okay, so yeah, I would think people listen in the car. It's just weird. All right, so I love, though, being able to pull down and just seeing everything that's new. And I mean, I can't even tell you how many different new things have just popped up here in the last hour. There's so much, but I love that. People only subscribe to an average of 6 shows. I don't even know where they put me on the scale. Okay. There's like, okay, I don't even know where they put me. 6? How about maybe 600? I mean, I'm close to 1,000. I just love all this new content coming in. So, all right. So the average podcaster or podcast listener subscribes to an average of 6 shows. Podcast listeners listen to an average of seven different shows per week. All right. 7 different shows per week. That's a little bit. I mean, they subscribe to 6, they listen to 7 different shows. All right. 93% listen to all or most of each episode. Now, that's one thing YouTube will show me in my statistics, how far people listen and then they stop. I've decided I don't like looking at that statistic. That is the most. And so I'll go back to where they stopped. And I'm like, why did they stop right there? What did I say? I didn't say anything offensive. And then I get all like paranoid. I'm like, okay, wait. All right, try not. Maybe I raise my voice too much, and then I just go crazy. But at least 93% listen to most. Podcast listening on a computer went up from 29 to 31%. Why did people start listening to podcasts on computers all of a sudden? Because that number was going down year after year after year after year after year, and now it's going back up. What in the world? Did I miss something? Are computers back in style? What is there? I wonder, are there more things available on like a desktop now to listen to podcasts? That just seems odd to me. 19% of listeners increased the speed. I don't know how the people who do that, I don't know what to say. I don't know how you do that. Look, if I increase the speed and it's, I'm like, I'm done. No, the people sound crazy. I want to hear their voice and the pause and the inflection. I want it because the whole thing about podcasting, especially audio podcasting, everything is being done with the voice. Like, you don't see facial expressions. You don't see my hand movements. I've got to do it with my voice. So when you speed it up, you're missing, like, podcasters, as someone who speaks, you make conscious choices in what you're doing. Like, I may move back from the microphone. I may move in. I may yell. I may get quiet. But it's just like I don't understand. I got friends who do that, and I just don't do that. But okay, yeah, that's fine. If you want to listen to an increased speed, that's okay. 65% of monthly podcast listeners have been listening for less than 3 years. Wow. So we got a lot of new podcast listeners. Comedy, education, and news are the most popular podcasting genres. The comedy is kind of surprising. News isn't surprising. Education, it would be interesting to know what educational podcasts people are listening to. In Canada, 91% of podcasting listening is done at home. Only 35% in Canada listen while they're driving. What do you do in Canada while you're driving? That is crazy. 24% listen at work. Podcast listeners listen to an average of 5 different shows per week in Canada. 81% of Canadians listen to most of each episode. So Canadians are more likely to stop listening in the middle. Mobile podcasting went from 59 to 75%. So in America, computer listening went up. In Canada, mobile listening went up. What in the world? That just seems so arbitrary. And in Canada, 27% listen at an increased speed. In Australia, 81% of podcast listening is done at home. 45% listen in a vehicle. 14% of all in-car listening to a podcast went up 12% in Australia. So more people are listening in a car in Australia. In Australia, 18% listen on public transportation. Now, I have had people call me while on a city bus saying, hey, I was just listening to your podcast, and then I'll hear the noise in the background, like, what's going on? Oh, I'm on a city bus, and I thought I would call you. And I'm like, I think that's always cool. 14% listen at work. 9% listen while working out. They listen to about 6 different shows per week. 85% listen to a podcast on a mobile device. In Australia, 11% listen on a computer. All right. And then here's just some other stats that I thought was interesting. 81% of podcast listeners pay attention to podcast ads. Well, you don't have to for me because I don't do that. 63% say they sometimes or always ignore TV commercials. 66% sometimes or always ignore digital ads. So this goes about with advertising. So at least, in other words, podcasting, of all the different places people can put an ad, podcasting seems to be people will pay attention to a podcast ad before they will pay attention to commercials anywhere else. That's interesting. That makes podcasting then very appealing to advertisers, and because people will listen to our commercial, and so then that's how you get your sponsors, and then that's how you can make your money, and well, that's okay. I get every day an email from Spreaker. You could have made this much money if you would monetize your podcast. You would have made this much money if you would have you could have made this much money. You could have made this much money. And sometimes I want to email them and say, stop telling me how much money I would have made. I don't want to see that, because I'm telling you, I'm a human being. I'm like, I could have bought the new iPad. I need a new iPad. I could have bought one for the amount of money that I could have made last month. I could have bought a new iPad. All right. If you take 3, 4, maybe 5 months combined, I could have already bought a new, I've never had one, a MacBook Pro, the brand new ones. I could have already bought a new MacBook Pro, a new iPad Air. I could have bought all kinds of things. I could have bought lots of things with the money I've made. So I hate when they send me those emails. I hate it. I'll get them from SoundCloud. I'll get them from Spotify. I get them from everywhere. You should be monetizing your podcast. You should be. I'm like, stop telling me that. But I'm never going to do it. Never going to do it. I just feel like monetizing the teaching, preaching, theology discussion is just, it's just, to me, it's just wrong. It's wrong. So those are some of the statistics. Now, I mention all of that because I just wanted to show you how much podcast has infiltrated popular culture, how much they are listened to, how many there are, so that you know that podcasting is something that I don't and I will have to say this, and I don't want to offend anyone. If you go to a church and they're not using podcasting, I don't understand. It makes no sense to me. I've been saying that since 2001. You churches, turn on a microphone. Do something with the technology available to you. It makes no sense to me. Right? There's people all around the world listening to podcasts every single day, and there's churches like, nope, I'll post my sermons on there. I'm like, don't you have a micro? Are you a pastor? Aren't you called to communicate? Turn on the microphone, talk about what's going on, devotions, Bible study, commentary. Just go. Use it to. It's like, hey, the Bible says we're to go into all the world. All right. Oh, here's the technology to go into all the world. And churches are like, well, what's that? What's a podcast? What's a microphone? What's a computer? I don't know what to say. Well, you're a pastor, for crying out loud. What do you mean you don't know what to say? Talking is like in our job description, right? We preach, we teach, we disciple. It's like, I don't want to put it on the internet. Why wouldn't? I've literally talked to pastors who are almost like, why would I want to do that? I'm like, I don't know. It's called the Great Commission. Now, to be fair, I do have to be fair here. Maybe if I was ever a pastor of a large church, I would think differently. Maybe I would think, you know what? Look at all the people here. But I would hope I would always have a global mindset. There's the world out there. And I cannot stress this enough. 2021, that demographic, 18 to 34, that listens to most podcasting, listen to most of the podcasts, those 18 to 34-year-olds, when they're looking for information about the Bible, theology, guess what? They're not going to your church. They're looking it up on podcast apps. That's where they're looking up information about the Bible. They're not going to the Bible Christian bookstore to buy a commentary. They are getting on their phone and they're looking up podcasts. They're looking up content on Pandora. I can't tell you, I've gotten emails from younger people. I was on Pandora and I was curious about, and I looked it up and I found your podcast and I'm like, that's insane. Yeah, 21, was it a 21-year-old in Germany who was looking for something about salvation by faith, or justified by faith, judged by works, something along those lines. I said, and we're looking on Spotify. So churches, people are listening to podcasts. It's like churches it'll be 10 years from now, and churches will be like, we need to get podcasts started. Like, I just don't understand. You got a church building, and many churches, they already have the far better audio visual equipment than I will ever own. And it's like, what? I don't get it. I don't understand, but it's out there. So here's what we're going to do. There's so many podcasts, so many. Which ones should we be listening to? So we're going to create, I'm going to try to get everyone to participate this. I've already asked the people in the Discord channel to start compiling their list. All right. I'm going to get everyone I can to give me their list of the podcasts they listen to, their favorites. Now, I know I can call it best. Best is very objective, but you get the idea. We're going to create a list of the best favorite podcasts that people should listen to, but we're going to do this in different categories. All right. So here's the categories we're going to look for. The best news podcast. These are things that keep you informed about what's going on in the world. All right. Just to give you some ones that I subscribe to. All right. For news podcast. All right. The world and everything in it. The World and Everything in It, I subscribe to that because it's news. It does have more of a Christian perspective, so I like hearing that perspective, all right? The World and Everything in It. The World, I think so The World and Everything in It, and then the second one is just called The World, and I think it's from PRI, Public Radio International, or it may be PRX, but it's just called The World. Right? I listen to that because I like to keep up with, I know I'm an American and I know this is contrary to the way Americans think, but I'm very aware that, there's a world out there. Okay. America isn't the world. And so I like to hear international perspective about what's going on. And I know this is going to be anathema. I don't always believe the American perspective is right. I know I said it. So I like to hear news from an international perspective so I can hear different perspectives, right? So there's the world. World News Tonight from ABC News. I love that one because it's about 30 minutes. They do a pretty good job keeping you informed of everything's going on. So it's great. Right before I go to bed, I click play for World News Tonight. The podcast drops, I think, around 6 or 7 p.m. Central Time, but it's always ready when I get ready to go to bed, whatever time that may be. All right, Up First from NPR. I always start my day off with Up First. Usually, a lot of times, about 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. Usually, I'll just for some reason in my mind, even if I've fallen asleep, I'll look over and I'm like, oh, it's 4 or 5, and I'll grab my phone and look for, okay, has Up First dropped? And boom, I'll hit Up First because that starts my day with what's going on in the world. Then I usually move to Start Here from ABC News. Then I will check to see if there's a new episode of Global News Podcast from the BBC. Now, you'll notice what I'm doing here. I got a little bit of Christian news perspective going on. I've got international perspective. I got different sources for news in the United States of America. And then, of course, I'm back to the BBC because that's the Global News Podcast. Then I subscribe to All Things Considered from NPR because that drops in the afternoon. Then I subscribe to Fox News Rundown, the morning and evening edition. See, I'm trying to get conservative. I'm trying to get liberal. I'm trying to get all kinds of different perspectives. Then I subscribe to a bunch of hourly news. I love because then every hour I know I'm going to get new content in my podcast app. So I love that. NPR News Now, Fox News, Hourly Update. I also subscribe to the BBC News Update, which drops every hour. USA Radio News Update. The ABC News one is, I don't get it. On some of the apps it works, on some of the apps it doesn't, but I try to subscribe to anything that's hourly news, I subscribe to. All right. Now there is, and it's hard to find, I will have to look for it, American Family News. Let's see, where is it? Where's their podcast? They've relabeled it. Here we go. Well, it's AFN News. AFN News. If you can find it, I'm going to have to try to see which apps it's on. When we compile our final list, I'm going to try to push to get the AFN News there because it does give news from a Christian perspective, but sometimes it's so politically influenced that it's not even Christian. It's fascinating to listen to. It drops 3 times a day, but I listen to it because I'm like, what? It's like, hey, AFN News, American Family News from American Family Radio, and it's like it's supposed to be news from a Christian perspective, but I'm like, that sounds like something I just heard on the Fox News, an hourly news update. Is this Christian or is this Fox News? Sometimes I can't tell the difference, which is something that you need to know. All right, and then I do the World News Roundup, the afternoon and late night edition that comes from CBS News. So what my goal for news is, I like things that are dropping every hour. I'm liking things that drop on a pretty regular and consistent basis, and I like my news to have some content that comes from somewhere other than America, covering international news. I also subscribe to Africa Today from the BBC. I also subscribe to news from Japan, from Australia, from Canada, Korea, pretty much anywhere I can find news podcasts. But those are just a list of things that I jump to. But we want our best of news, not news commentary, news, not news commentary, right? If it's a program that you're like, well, they do a great job talking about the news, we got to put that in a different category. We just want things that are reporting the news, not necessarily opinion or commentary on it. All right? We got to separate that out. So there's my news podcast. So that's the one category we're going to look at, news. Second category, Christian. The second category is your favorite Christian podcast. Now, this can include, I think we'll include this for now. We may have to separate it into a different category. It can include anything Christian. It could be a church that posts their sermons online. I don't care what it is. Any Christian content that basically can be found on a podcast app, right? You name it. Now, what I have written down, I just started writing a couple of things down last night just to show you. I got to find it here in my my journal here. Where did I put it in my journal? Okay, here we go. Here's 5 that I have down right now for Christian podcasts. Discover the Word podcast. I don't always agree with their theology. Sometimes I get very irritated with them, but it just really captures what's going on in the evangelical church, and it's designed for that small group idea, which sometimes drives me crazy, but I like to at least keep up with what's going on in the evangelical world. That's the Discover the Word podcast. Issues, etc. That comes from a Lutheran perspective, but they do a good job covering so many different things that it's very much worth your time. Breakpoint, the Breakpoint podcast, because it's about 5 minutes long and it gives commentary about what's going on in the world. Exegetically speaking, I do that one because, well, it's about exegesis and exegetically speaking, looking at a passage of Scripture exegetically, and they deal with some hermeneutical issues. Don't always agree with their perspective either, but it's pretty good. And then I subscribe to the Sermon Audio MP3 feed. I just go type in Sermon Audio. Usually there's 2 or 3 feeds, and it brings in all of the latest sermons from Sermon Audio to whatever your podcast app is. Those are just 5 I've written down right now. I'm going to do more later. I just wanted to throw out a couple there to get you started. All right. And of course, number 1 should be Theology Central. I mean, come on, right? Okay, I'm joking. You may put me at the bottom of your list. That's okay. Or you may not even be on your list. That's perfectly okay. All right. So, those are Christian podcasts. So we have news, we have Christian podcasts. And then the third category we're just going to call general. It can be anything. I don't care what it is. I listen to a lot of classic radio dramas. I love classic radio dramas. I know I wasn't alive during those times, but it's something fascinating to me about listening to those audio dramas. I mean, if it's suspense, all the different, I could go on the Westerns from like Gunsmoke, you name it. I could go The Shadow, there's the ones that were comedy. Now I have Sirius XM satellite radio. I subscribe to their internet streaming service, and they have radio classics that do nothing but radio drama. But there's some podcasts that do radio dramas as well. I think it's called USA Radio Classics, and they do like 4-hour blocks every day of the best of the radio dramas of the past. I love it. Just the actors have to convey the story with their voice, and then all of the sound effects that they were using. I love the radio dramas. I listen to them frequently. So that would probably show up in one of my general feeds. So that would be on my general list. It can be anything. It can be lectures from a university. It can be true crime. I know that's a popular category in podcasts. Whatever you think are your favorite things to listen to. I listen to one, what's it called? Things You Need to Know. And it's just about, it can be about anything that they think is interesting information that you need to know. I listen to a lot of history podcast, just anything in the general category. So the 3 categories: your favorite, your top, what you believe are the best podcast in the news category, in the Christian category, and in the general category. We're going to compile the list. I'll do an episode revealing the top 10 for all three categories, and then they will all be posted on theologycentral.net, and I'm going to give people time to compile their list and see what they've got, all right? And if nobody does, well, then I'll just compile mine, right? So, and I've had people email me before, what are all the news podcasts you subscribe to? And I did a podcast episode listing all of them, but we're going to try to reduce it to 10 in each category, because then it just becomes it becomes overwhelming again. And we don't want that. But it'll be interesting. The more people who participate, the more variety we will get. The less people participate, then it just becomes the voice of one, which I don't think will be very beneficial. All right. There you have it. That's all I wanted to do. I already took longer than I wanted to, but that's what I wanted to do. And I just knew I needed to get these things done now, because I'd like to have these all done before the beginning of the year. And then everybody starts the year out going, here's the podcast I'm going to be listening to this year, right? And then maybe it will make having that podcast app on your mobile device actually worth something of value, all right? And hopefully you already find it valuable from this podcast. And I know what you're thinking. Well, you do so many podcast episodes, I don't have time to listen to anything else. There may be truth to that, all right? There may be truth to that, because I because I always get the emails. I can't keep up. You just do too many. And I'm like, well, I don't know what to tell you. Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize. Now, but then I'll get the emails going, you don't do enough. So then I'm like, well, I'm sorry. I'm only human. So there's usually no win situation there. But let's podcasts are everywhere. They're influential. They're a part of popular culture. Millions of people are listening. Millions of episodes are available. Hundreds of thousands of episodes drop almost hourly. There's so much to choose from. Let's see if we can narrow it down to make it more productive for everyone. And here's the great thing. Whenever we compile the list, there's going to be, I can almost guarantee, things on that list that you've never listened to, that you've never considered, which then may expose you to something that you were like, wow, that was really good, right? So that's what we'll do. And with the Christian list, I still want to do it. I have learned my lesson. You don't want to do too much and trying to promote Christian podcasts, because if you do it the wrong way, the Christian podcasters will get upset at you and then threaten, basically accuse you of a copyright infringement, and then basically you have to delete all of your episodes, because how dare you play part of their podcast to get people to listen to it. That's horrible. That's the last thing you would want. The last thing I would want is people to play my episodes and tell people to subscribe to my podcast. That would be horrible. I don't even know what I would do. I don't know. But I don't want anyone to take away from me, because I'm a Christian podcaster. I want those numbers. I want those streams, because I'm monetizing my podcast and I want to make money. I'm not worried about getting the message out. I'm worried about making, okay, all right, maybe I'm being a little too critical, but again, that if you don't know what I'm referring to, that's great. You don't need to know the whole story. But it's so frustrating the way it went down, because a simple email to me, which I give my email in every episode, it could have been easily just like, okay, I apologize. You think I use too much of your content. You don't like it. I'll just delete the episodes. And I would have moved on. But it turned into, no, we're going to contact your podcast hosting site, and we're going to try to get you in trouble for a copyright violation. And then we're going to get people all ticked off at you. And then, because I still think it's connected, because right after that happened, literally right after that happened, all of a sudden we started getting 0 to 1 star ratings on Apple Podcasts, literally when that all went down. And they weren't even leaving reviews. They were just like boom, boom. And all of a sudden our rating dropped down on Apple Podcasts to like a 4, maybe a 3.5 star, which then makes us not visible, which lowers our visibility. And that, which is just, I can't say that it just seemed weird, because it just came out of the blue. Typically when people don't like me, they email me and tell me you're a piece of garbage and whatever. It just went like, hey, and then it just sounded like that there was a group of people connected to that podcast, and they got all upset with me thinking that I was somehow stealing their content. And the goal was to try to get people to listen to them. The goal was try to get, it's weird because at that very same time, there was another Christian podcast called Heaven Bent that I played, reviewed, because never did I just take content and say, everyone just listen to this. This is my episode today, their episode. No, it was always like using their episode as review, critique, being transformative. That's the legal language. If you use someone else's content, it has to be transformative, that it transforms into something different and other than the content you're using. And then it falls under fair use law, and then you're allowed to use other content. Right? As long as you're doing so not for commercial gain. In other words, you're not making any money. You're doing commentary, critique, review, and by the time you're done, it's so transformed the original content into something unique in itself. We met all of the fair use criteria, but there was another podcast, Heaven Bent, where we played a large portion of their content, offering critique and review, telling everyone to go subscribe to it. And the owner of that podcast had no problem at all. In fact, they told someone they were glad for what we did. There was another podcast called, it was something dealing with with literature. I can't remember the name of it. And I did some podcasts telling everyone about that one, and they thanked me for trying to lead people to their podcast. Anytime anyone's ever gotten upset with me, it just happened to be a Christian podcaster. It's just to this day, it's just so weird. And all they had to do was email me, and I would have said, I'm sorry, I'll delete the content. I'll never mention your name again. I'm never going to mention their name again. I said I would never mention their name again, because it's just like, man, what in the world? Nobody was claiming that I wasn't claiming it was my content. I wasn't trying to take people away from your podcast in any way, shape, or form. And what's weird is Chris Rosebrough, he's had issues because he reviews sermons and he's critical. And he's had pastors, because their sermons are being reviewed and critical, go after him for a copyright violation. So a lot of times what he does now, and this is such a foolish thing, and I don't have the ability to do it. If you just slow the speed down and the audio you're playing, where it's like, turn your Bibles to Mark. You slow it down or you speed it up. Turn your Bibles to Mark. You speed it up a little bit or slow it down. You've changed it, so therefore you can't get in trouble for a copyright violation. That's the most ridiculous thing in the world. Like what? Look, if you post a sermon out there, someone may not like it and critique it. To me, the issue isn't did they critique it. The issue is did they play enough? I would rather them play all of my sermon and rip it to shreds, but at least all of my sermon was played. I would get more upset if they took a 30-second clip, then destroyed me, but no one actually heard what I had to say. If everyone gets to hear my entire perspective and then they hear the person critiquing me, at least they have both perspectives available to them. So just some weird things that happen there, but I'm still going to try to promote Christian podcast to the best of my ability. Just try to always be thankful, or always try to be thoughtful in how I do so to hopefully not tick anyone off. And I'm still going to do reviews and critiques, because that is literally completely allowed under the fair use law. That's clearly used. When you're offering critique, I mean, you're turning that into something completely different. But I'm getting sidetracked on other podcasting issues, but things that I've had to deal with, which sadly at times it's very frustrating that I've had to deal with these issues, but it's just the reality. All right. That's what's going on. Hopefully you will participate. Email me your list, newsif@yahoo.com. Even if you say, well, I don't have 10, even if you just got 2 or 3, even if you just got 1, that's perfectly okay, because then that just goes along with, because it may be one I've never even heard of. So I'll benefit from it as well. newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. And those in the Discord channel, you can just post it right there. It's simple. It's easy. So there you go. All right. Hopefully it'll be fun. Maybe it'll be a waste of everyone's time. But there's so much out there. We got to come up with I just want to go into 2022 going, this is what I should listen to and benefit from it, than just flandering around, trying to find something to listen to and not really getting the most out of it. If the content's there, let's get that content and listen to it. All right. Okay. So, all right. Hopefully that's beneficial. All right. Everyone have a great day. God bless.